All right, so this says I'm live, and it looks like everything's working. I made multiple attempts to try and do this and go live and have it work smoothly. So hopefully it is actually working this time. So let's take a peek here. I've got the chat up so I can actually see what's going on there. Let's see. Try and blow this up a little bit so I can get a better look at it so I can actually see it. Just in case somebody happens to jump in there and decides to chat. I'm gonna just reposition that a little bit and we'll transition. There we go. That's a little better. So anyway, I wanted to come on and share some stories that I just really caught my eye here in the last day or so with what's going on out there. When we were talking about riots, protests, all these different things. And it's just crazy. It really is just nuts what is happening. And I want to start with a story here out of Portland. I think one of the things that's really jumping out as we go through these protests that are just continuing, and I don't know what day we're on in Portland, something like 83 or something like that, where these protests just keep going on and on and on, and the violence just isn't stopping. And we keep hearing about, mostly peaceful protesters, and it's just not the case. So I wanted to jump out, share this story here. Let's take a look. So this is in Portland. This is Portland protesters set fire to county government building. That is not peaceful protesting. Demonstrations that often turn violent have racked Oregon's biggest city for more than 2 months following the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. This is as of August 19th. Protesters in Portland broke the windows out of a county government building, sprayed lighter fluid inside, and set a fire in a demonstration that started Tuesday night and ended Wednesday morning with clashes with police, officials said. So, obviously, this isn't a peaceful protest. Once again, and what's getting me on a lot of this is the lack of national attention that this is getting. This story is actually out of New York, but you're not getting a lot of as much national attention on this. I think with the longevity of these protests and the violence that has surrounded them, I don't understand why they're not getting this national attention. And personally, I believe that there's a narrative here that we're trying to push that these are peaceful protests and they don't want to talk about all this violence that's taking place. And furthermore, I think the other side of this is remember, we heard that the federal agents that were in Portland were responsible for inciting some of this violence. That's gone. There's no mention of that, but the violence is continuing. So the fire I'm going to butcher the name here. The fire at the Multnomah building damaged the county government's Office of Community Involvement, where Oregon's first gay marriage took place and where protective gear has been distributed to try to prevent the spread of coronavirus, said Multnomah County Chair Deborah Caffery. I hope I'm doing okay on these names. This is the heart of our county, where people in our community come to get married, get their passports, and celebrate their cultural traditions and diversity, she said in a statement. Demonstrations that often turn violent have gripped Oregon's biggest city for more than 2 months following the police killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. So this has been going on for months, and it's saying right here that these things often turn violent. And I saw this story just because I know there's probably some people on the left who are going to look at this, think I'm being biased or whatever the case may be. I saw this on Fox News as well, and I intentionally went and I said, well, we'll grab an NBC affiliate and see what they have to say about it, because I don't want it to look as if this is coming from some right-wing news source. I wanted to hey, look, I'm trying to be impartial. This is NBC reporting. I don't think anybody really is going to accuse NBC of being, a right-wing news outlet. So I'm hoping that, we take a look at this and we can say, yeah, all right, this is real. This is what's going on. So I'll continue here. Participants have repeatedly broken into the offices of a police union headquarters building, and last month clashed for weeks with federal agents dispatched to protect a U.S. courthouse targeted by protesters. Portland officers late Tuesday declared a riot outside the county building after demonstrators, among a crowd of about 200, started fires in dumpsters, used rocks to smash first floor windows, and tossed burning material inside that set off fire alarms and the building's sprinkler system, police said in a statement early Wednesday. So once again, they're attacking this building. The riot declaration, that's what allows officers to use crowd control methods such as tear gas or flashbang devices. Police said in their statement that some unspecified crowd control munitions were used to disperse the crowd, but that officers did not use tear gas. Two protesters were arrested, and one police officer suffered minor injuries in scuffles as police broke up demonstrations, the statement said. The point is we keep hearing peaceful protests, mostly peaceful protests. And I think there's a narrative at play here where it's peaceful protests and it is police who are instigating this violence. And when we read these stories, not on the national news, but when we read stories from smaller affiliates, like this one out of New York. Now, I know this is not a local affiliate. This is an affiliate in New York reporting on something that's happening in Portland. But like I said, this is an NBC affiliate reporting out of New York on something that's happening in Portland. Unlike the national stories, you're not hearing the police are instigating this, and the smaller affiliates are actually reporting what's really going on the ground. And I think that's why you're not seeing these stories coming out in the national media the same way, because the local affiliates are going to directly contradict that, and it's going to expose kind of a narrative that's trying to be pushed here. That's my opinion, but I think that's why you're not seeing this in the national news as much. I do searches on Google, and let's see NBC, CNN. I go to these major websites, and you don't see reports on this violence. You have to go to smaller affiliates to even read about it. They're really keeping the lid on the amount of violence that's actually taking place in these protests. So another story out of Portland that really disturbed me. And there's video here that I am not going to show. You can find it. It's all over the place. So if you wanted to look at it, you want to watch it, that's fine. Go find it on your own. I'm not going to replay the video here. It's kind of not what I'm really about. Protesters punched and kicked a man to the ground in Portland, Oregon after he crashed his truck onto the sidewalk on Sunday night near otherwise demonstrations. Not exactly the greatest writing. Portland police said they received a report around 10:30 p.m. of protesters chasing a truck a few blocks from the downtown federal courthouse. The driver crashed and was then assaulted, authorities said. Now, I did watch the video. The assault is gruesome. It's brutal. That's why I'm not going to show it here. Whenever a driver is assaulted, the story that comes out is always, of course, that he attempted to hit protesters. And one of the things that gets me with that is if he's trying to hit protesters, he's going to hit protesters. Protesters aren't hard to hit. If you drive into a crowd of people and your goal is to hit people, you will hit people. So witness told the police the man had been helping a transgender female who had an item of hers stolen, and he was dragged out of the car and beaten by 9 or 10 people. Video posted, this is the paragraph earlier, but video posted online of the incident showed the man sitting in the street next to the truck. A crowd gathered around him and repeatedly punched and kicked him in the head until he was bloody and unconscious. It wasn't immediately clear what led to the crash or the confrontation. Portland police said their response to the assault was complicated by a hostile group. Authorities made no arrests and are investigating the incident. So nobody was arrested. There's tons of video. I would imagine the people responsible for the actual attack are going to get caught and they're going to be brought to justice. But the attack was brutal. And it was a direct kick. As he's sitting on the ground, he's already beaten and bloodied to some extent. He gets a kick directly to the face that knocks him unconscious. It's just terrible video. The man was later loaded into an ambulance and taken to a hospital with serious injuries and is recovering. The truck was towed. I condemn this violence, says Mike Schmidt, the Multnomah County District Attorney. Assaults on community members and police officers undermine everything our community is doing to bring meaningful and lasting change to the criminal justice system. These people who are doing these protests do not care about bringing change to the criminal justice system. We need to stop pretending that is one of their primary goals. That's not what they're trying to accomplish here. These people are not trying to bring change. That's not their goal. Their goal is violence. That is the stated goal. I am done pretending that and look, I'm a pretty strong critic of the Black Lives Matter movement. This isn't even Black Lives Matter anymore. We know who these are. These are Marxist infiltrators. This is Antifa. These are people whose sole purpose is to sow civil unrest. That is what their goal is. That is what they're doing. It's Portland. It's Richmond. It was Minneapolis. This isn't. And I feel sorry for the Black Lives Matter, the sincere people who go out and they march with Black Lives Matter. I think their intentions are good, even if their efforts are misplaced. I feel bad that their movement has gotten co-opted by this, but they need to stop. Okay. And I'm a firm believer in the right to peacefully assemble, in our constitutional rights. I'm a libertarian. Get out there and peacefully demonstrate and even engage in some civil disobedience if that's not getting you where you need to go. But your movement has been completely co-opted. Innocent people are being hurt. Businesses are being destroyed. We saw the story about the Ronald McDonald House being attacked in Chicago. I mean, a Ronald McDonald House attacked in Chicago. It's inexcusable. And the protests need to stop, because all you're doing right now is providing cover for these people whose primary goal is to perpetrate violence and to cause civil unrest. That's their only goal. So this story was terrible. And these are two stories out of Portland. And this one did get some national attention. Not as much. Again, this is a local story, Las Vegas Sun, as opposed to one of the big, and it's hard to find these stories on national media platforms. You just don't find them out there. You've got to go out and you've got to search for this stuff because it's really not being reported. So on to the next thing here. And this is not violent. This is kind of the most ridiculous bit of fallout from what happened in Minneapolis. And this is a story that's picking up a little bit of steam. I think we're still missing some of it, but this is nuts. So we'll go to this Minneapolis story. Let me just pull this up here. Get rid of this. Oops. There we go. Let's see here. We'll move this over to this story here. So this is Minneapolis. Landscape of rubble persists as many... I don't understand this at all with what's going on in Minneapolis. And keep in mind, Minneapolis asked for federal aid to help get this cleaned up and to help recover and all that stuff. So Minneapolis, landscape of rubble persists as Minneapolis demands taxes in exchange for permits. So in Minneapolis, on a desolate lot where Don Blythe's bookstore stood before being destroyed in the May riots, two men finished their cigarettes and then walked through a dangerous landscape filled with slippery debris and sharp objects. The city won't let Blythe haul away his wreckage without a permit, and he can't get a contractor to tell him how much it will cost to rebuild the store until that happens. This gentleman can't even get an estimate on how much, and if you understand how insurance works, he's got to get this estimate and he's got to get some stuff approved before he can really start moving forward. He can't do that until he's permitted. Now, this is the same city that went and asked and criticized Donald Trump for not sending them money to fix this up. They're not letting store owners clean up the mess because they want to collect money for permitting first. Now, in St. Paul, where Jim Stage's pharmacy burned down during the same disturbances, crews have already removed the bricks and scorched timbers. A steel fence keeps out trespassers. Stage expects construction of his new Lloyd's pharmacy to begin later this month. The main reason for the different recoveries is simple. Minneapolis requires owners to prepay the second half of their 2020 property taxes in order to obtain a demolition permit. St. Paul does not. Prepay the second half of their 2020 property taxes in order to obtain a demolition permit. Minneapolis has not been particularly friendly towards business for some time, said Blythe, who prepaid $8,847 in taxes last week, but still hasn't received his demolition. He paid his almost $9,000 in taxes, still doesn't have his permit. They say they want to be helpful, but they certainly have not been, he goes on to say. City officials say their hands are tied. Now, these are the same city officials who want to defund the police, abolish the police. These are the city of Minneapolis. I lived there for a long time. We recently moved away from that area. The city of Minneapolis has lost its mind. They have gone so far to the left. They're so progressive that I'm surprised some of these businesses even want to bother rebuilding there. So city officials say their hands are tied, pointing to a state law that prohibits the removal of any structures or standing timber until all of the taxes assessed against the buildings have been fully paid. City officials say the law, however, leaves enforcement to the county, and Hennepin County officials said they made it clear to the city of Minneapolis this summer that they would not enforce the requirement for any riot-damaged properties. So let's think about this in hindsight, looking at what's gone on in the city of Minneapolis. For one, we had the city of Minneapolis essentially ordering their police to abandon the third precinct. They abandoned the third precinct and let it burn because they didn't want to cause trouble with the riot. They wanted the rioters to be allowed to riot, essentially. Let's not say it any other way. They wanted to allow this riot to go on. They want to say that, they didn't want to get no confrontation. Well, their city burned to the ground because of that. Because they didn't enforce the law when people went out and burned buildings to the ground and destroyed businesses. They didn't want to enforce the law. Now that the victims of that violence are trying to clean up the mess, Minneapolis is standing in the way and not letting them. Now they're going to enforce the law. Now the law matters to Minneapolis. Now that there's the people who own these businesses who've seen their life's work decimated are trying to come back in and clean and rebuild in this city that failed to defend them. Now Minneapolis is interested in the law. Now Minneapolis is going to follow the rules. Now we're going to enforce certain county, state regulations. We didn't care when your building was being burned down. We didn't care when rioters were attacking a police precinct. We couldn't enforce those laws. But now that you want to rebuild, you got to pay your taxes or you can't get a permit. That is the most ridiculous. I just can't believe it. And I'll say it again. I don't understand why anybody would want to rebuild in the city of Minneapolis. I would take the insurance money and I would run to a city that actually cares. I would run to a city that wants to defend you. I would run to a city that would deploy their police when rioters are on the street, and I would run to a city that will let you rebuild. For God's sakes, I'm going to demand that you repay tax. It's just ridiculous. It's just insane to me. So as we go on, local businesses owners are appalled by the finger pointing, noting that nearly 100 properties in Minneapolis were destroyed or severely damaged in the riots following the death of George Floyd. The vast majority of those properties are either are either still standing or have been turned into ugly and often dangerous piles of rubble. Owners say the lack of progress is discouraging reinvestment and sending customers to other parts of the. Owners say the lack of progress is discouraging reinvestment and sending customers to other parts of the metro. Now, if you're not familiar with Minneapolis, St. Paul, they call them the Twin Cities up there, right next to each other. And Minneapolis has some beautiful suburbs, Edina, Woodbury. There's some really nice areas up there where people can go. They can go and eat out. They can go see a movie. Anything that you can do in downtown Minneapolis, you can do outside of the city, and you can probably do it outside of the city cheaper because the taxes are lower. So not only these business owners not being allowed to reopen, they're losing future business because when you think about the restaurant business and the bar business, it's habitual, right? So you find a tavern that you like, a bar that you like, a restaurant that you like to eat, that's the place you're going to go to. You're going to keep frequenting a place that you enjoy. The longer these places aren't allowed to rebuild, the longer these places aren't allowed to reopen, the more of their future customer base is going to disappear out into the suburbs. The longer the city looks the way it looks, the longer this destruction is on site and not being cleaned up, the more people who are going to leave the city. And the city's killing itself. You're seeing the same thing happen in New York in kind of some different ways, but I don't understand these cities that are controlled by the far left leadership on the city councils and the mayor's office that are, look, you're trying to prove that your progressive politics are what's good for America, then let your cities thrive. They're destroying their own cities. This is the example. I mean, is this the kind of leadership we're going to bring to the rest of the United States? I'm not a Trump supporter, but man, I can understand the fear of the far left right now. Anyway, cleaning up that mess is expensive. Most property owners must pay $35,000 to $100,000 to clear their sites of debris, with larger tracts such as strip shopping centers costing as much as $400,000, according to property owners. That doesn't include the money those owners must pay to get their permits. On average, owners of property destroyed or significantly damaged owe $25,000 in taxes for the second half of 2020, which come due in October, according to a Star Tribune review of our county property records. One of the interesting things about that is when you talk about relief, you're hearing, and I understand that the people in Minneapolis are not the people in Washington, D.C. I understand these aren't the same people. But my question is this. The Republicans are getting criticized on a national level, at the federal level, for not providing relief, for not providing aid. Can't the city of Minneapolis waive those taxes until the end of 2021? Isn't there a way that they can help these business owners not have to pay the second half of their property taxes until after their businesses are rebuilt, at the very minimum, let alone standing in the way of even letting them rebuild? I mean, it's in Wellington's case here. So in Wellington's case, the family paid $188,944 in property taxes to get a demolition permit for their High Lake shopping center, which was hit by 3 or 4 fires that gutted the property. Wellington said his company has deep pockets, so that wasn't a major hardship. But he said many property owners lost their only source of income to the riots in the pandemic, leaving them unable to comply with the city's rules. People are suffering pretty dramatically, so this is a considerable ask. keep in mind, before all this happened, like I said, I used to live up in that area up until very recently. And look, I can tell you, it was a ghost town on the Minneapolis side. My wife and I went up there Memorial Day weekend, and we thought, hey, we're going to the city. I think things are starting to open back up. We drove up into the city, and there was nothing there. It was dead. So we drove back across the border to Wisconsin and to Hudson, and there was a ton of stuff going on. The restaurants were packed. And because of the regulations and the way that the city and the county there were handling things, the businesses there were dead. So these businesses were already being decimated by COVID-19 before these things even hit. These people don't have a ton of spare money just laying around. And like Mr. Wellington pointed out, a lot of these people lost their only source of income. So for Minneapolis to stand in the way of people wanting to clean up their own mess, not their own mess, the mess created by someone else, not asking the city to do it, just, hey, let me go in there and clean this up so I can get my business up and running again. For the city to be standing in the way is disgusting. Anyway, so I wanted to highlight that as well. I mean, I just don't get it. And then one of the things that we hear a lot is how most of these protests have been peaceful protests. I think that's a pretty common theme that you hear out there. All these are relatively peaceful protests or primarily peaceful protests. And if you read local affiliates, if you read smaller news sources, you'll see that's absolutely not the case. These things are consistently falling into violence. If you've been here the whole time I've been speaking, you can talk about the violence that's been in Portland. I went over two pretty disturbing stories from Portland about the amount of violence. And so to paint this as mostly peaceful protests, I think that lie is starting to get exposed, I think, pretty clearly, that these are not primarily peaceful protests, that these are denigrating into violence on a pretty regular basis. So to me, this story really kind of screams that that's a lie, that the peaceful protest story is an absolute lie. If you take a look here, this is in Richmond, and who knew that there was protests in Richmond, Virginia? Right? Who knew that this Virginia Mercury? Again, we have to go to a local affiliate to get these kinds of stories. There was violence in Richmond. After a night of destructive protests in Richmond involving a torched dump truck, shattered windows, chemical agents, and several arrests, Major LeVar Stoney made a surprising claim. White supremacists marching under the banner of Black Lives Matter, he said Sunday, had spearheaded the violence. So you go back to the headline, obviously, did white supremacists really orchestrate riots in Richmond? It's complicated. It's not complicated. I'm going to go through the story. I'm going to explain who these different groups actually are and how they're really trying to mislead you here. And what they're trying to do is cover for the fact that, yes, these things are violent, and they don't want you to acknowledge. The left doesn't want to be responsible for acknowledging that this violence is actually happening. So white supremacists, I read that last night, shows that the real hate comes from the racism that is still very much alive in our Commonwealth, Stoney said, and some have used this movement to still express that hate. When asked to elaborate, Stoney deferred to Police Chief Gerald Smith, leaning at the lectern to say it was certainly spoken of on social media outlets, an apparent reference to the fact that a few armed white men in Hawaiian shirts, the outfit of the far-right anti-government Boogaloo movement, were spotted in the crowd and denounced by other marchers. Okay, so let me stop you right there. I, as a libertarian, and if you are a libertarian watching this, you're probably pretty familiar with the Boogaloo movement. This is not a far-right movement. These are libertarians. These are very active, very aggressive, very anti-government libertarians, but they are definitely not far-right libertarians. And for the most part, they are marching with, I met a few just a couple of weeks ago here in South Carolina. These men are marching with Black Lives Matter. These men support Garrett Foster, who was killed tragically a couple of weeks ago. So they are the Boogaloo boys, as they call themselves, are strong supporters of Black Lives Matter. You couldn't ask for less racist people. I know these people personally, at least some of them. I can't speak to what's in all of their hearts, but I can tell you that the movement itself has nothing to do with being a racist movement. That's a ridiculous claim from someone who doesn't know what they're talking about or is intentionally trying to mislead the public. So when Smith came up to speak, he said, police had identified some individuals that have been with the Boogaloo Boys, as well as others involved in or influenced by the Antifa movement, a loosely organized group of far-left activists. That's accurate. Antifa is a far-left activist movement. And they have no problem using violence, and they're primarily responsible for the majority of the violence that's taken place. And again, I'll say it's not. I feel like when I look at what's going on out there, I think it's a tiered level of responsibility. So you have Antifa, and they are, I believe, fully infiltrated into the Black Lives Matter movement. And what they're doing is they are inciting the violence. They're getting the violence started. They're getting the party started. Then you have a group of opportunists who go out and do the looting. You have Black Lives Matter, who tends to shout down anybody who opposes them. So those conversations get pretty heated. I don't know that the Black Lives Matter protesters, the overwhelming majority of them, certainly, but the people who go out to protest police violence are actually starting this stuff. I think it's Antifa who has infiltrated the Black Lives Matter movement, which is why I think the Black Lives movement needs to stand down to put an end to this violence. And then you have the Antifa, like I said, you have Antifa that's infiltrated this. You have the opportunists who are doing the looting and the stealing. And then you have these Boogaloo boys who are out there trying to show support for Black Lives Matter. But I think they're very misguided. As a libertarian, I think they're misguided because their support is more in line with the violence that's taking place from the far left, not standing down or standing against that violence. They should be putting themselves between the buildings and the protesters to protect property and prevent the violence that is taking away from the movement itself. Whether you support the movement or not, the violence is definitely hurting the movement. So if the Boogaloo boys, or the Boog boys as they call themselves, want to go out there and do good, their number one goal should be to prevent violence against property, which is what's causing the escalation in violence, which is what's really, really harming the Black Lives Matter movement. And I think that's where they're misguided. Personally, I think they're almost siding with Antifa because they're helping the groups that are inciting the violence. They're out there protecting the right of people to protest. That's their thought process, but they're allowing this violence to happen. They should really be doing everything they can to maintain the peace. But if they want to get out there and be part of the movement, that's where I think they could do the most good. And they should be absolutely standing opposed to Antifa, which is a violent movement that is Marxist at its roots, that opposes free speech, that opposes property rights, and that is really instigating the majority of the violence that we're seeing. So that's how I see it. If you see something different, please drop a note in the comments. I try and respond to all my comments within a day, usually quicker if I can. So anyway, the claim that racists had orchestrated what was ostensibly a pro-Black Lives Matter event quickly drew national attention, fueled partly by a headline posted by a Roanoke area TV station that paraphrased the official's comments as police. Richmond riots instigated by white supremacists disguised as Black Lives Matter. The interesting thing is all this other violence that's taking place, and the Antifa and all this other stuff has been, Antifa isn't real, is what we've heard them say. We've heard them say that these protests are peaceful. The moment we can start pinning this on a far right group, national media is all over it. Isn't that interesting? It's almost as if there's a narrative that they're trying to push here. But Wasim Rashid, a Democratic candidate for Congress, challenging U.S. Rep. Rob Whitman, tweeted the headline and said, "I won't hold my breath for Trump or the GOP to call out these white supremacist terrorists and apologize to Black Lives Matter." Hey, I'm not holding my breath for Black Lives Matter and Antifa and Democrats to call out all the other violence that's taking place either. So let's stop with this nonsense. Can we say that all this violence is wrong and let's put a stop to it? That's the kind of stuff that drives me nuts. And I'm not a Republican. I don't care about Trump and the GOP or any of that stuff. But for Pete's sake, I won't hold my breath for Trump or the GOP to call out these white supremacist terrorists and apologize to BLM. Are we getting an apology about the attack on Ronald McDonald House from a single Black Lives Matter organizer? Are we getting an apology for the looting and the rioting that's taking place? We had a Black Lives Matter organizer come out and say it was justified, that it's okay to loot because that's reparations. Where's the Democrats on that? Is that violence okay? Is this the dividing line that we're going to draw? It's ridiculous. Early Tuesday afternoon, the Virginia Mercury asked officials to clarify the basis for the mayor's comments. As of Wednesday evening, neither the Richmond Police Department nor the mayor's office had provided additional evidence of white supremacist influence because they're not going to find any. Let's think about this from a strategic perspective. Why would a white supremacist want to interfere with this in any way, shape, or form? Black Lives Matter, Antifa, these people are doing enough harm to themselves and the public eye They don't need to go out there and cause trouble. They're causing enough trouble on their own, and they're losing a ton of credibility with the people who would otherwise be supporting them. So for me, why would you even bother? If I'm a white supremacist, hey, let's let this thing roll. They're doing all the damage themselves. So come on. So they're not going to find evidence of white supremacist influence. They're just not. It's not going to happen. The confusion in Richmond appeared to arise from an unlikely alliance between members of the Black Lives Matter 757, an independent Hampton Roads area group that has clashed with other Black Lives Matter leaders and progressive organizers, and a Boogaloo supporter named Mike Dunn, who appeared with the BLM 757 group in Richmond. Dunn insists he is not a white supremacist, and both he and the BLM 757 say Dunn's group had left the protest before it became raucous. Now, I'm going to try and see here if I can find this real quickly. I should have had this prep, and I apologize. Hey, I'm a one-man operation. What can I say? I think I can find this. I believe Spike Cohen. Yeah, this is it right here on Twitter. Get the strap here. Let's take a peek here. So this is Spike Cohen. He's the vice presidential candidate for the Libertarian Party. And this is him. Yesterday, I attended the Get the Strap rally in Richmond, Virginia to speak and engage with peaceful armed protesters from BLM 757 and Task Force 10. We spoke about criminal justice, community policing, gun rights, and the libertarian solutions to problems we face across the country. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, I don't want to speak out of turn, somebody can fact check me on this. I believe BLM 757 actually came out and endorsed the Libertarian Party after that. The interesting thing about that is here, take a look at this photo in the background. See that? That's a Boogaloo boy. See the Hawaiian shirt? The media is completely lying to you about who these people are and what they are. So this is what gets me. They want to pin this on the right so bad as a way to justify the violence that the left and the far left have been perpetrating in all these different cities. It's really amazing how aggressively they are willing to mislead the people and how complicit the media is in all of this. So folks, if you're out there and you're watching this stuff and you're wondering what's going on and who these different factions are, do your research, go online, look this stuff up, because it's very, very important that we understand what's going on and what's taking place in this country, because the whole thing is getting so confusing. A lot of people are just going to watch and wait for what the mainstream media is coming out to tell them. So we have to be diligent in this time of pretty obvious deception about what is happening in the country. We really have to keep our ears to the ground, do our own research. They say, don't believe anything you're being told out there until you confirm it for yourself, because the situation is complex and getting more and more complex. So there you go. The Boogie Boys, it should be the Boog Boys, are awesome. Spike taking gun rights with BLM. This is libertarians, and I, as a libertarian, have been kind of an outspoken opponent. Opponent's probably not the right word. An outspoken critic of Black Lives Matter. I have absolutely criticized the movement, but to say that the Boog Boys are far right that's ridiculous, and to indicate that they would have any racist tendencies is absolutely crazy. So I saw these stories come across today, and I said yesterday I'd probably just drop in and do some news articles today, and that's kind of what I wanted to do, just to hit some of this ridiculous stuff that's taking place out there. The bottom line is the situation is the riots are ongoing. The violence is ongoing. You're not going to hear about this necessarily in mainstream circles. If you're following a bunch of different social media feeds, you're going to hear about it. But make sure you're doing your investigating. Look at different sources, because there's a lot of bad information coming out on all of this. And it's coming from the Democrats. It's coming from the Republicans. It's coming from mainstream media on both sides. And if we're not on the ground, we've really just got to look at this thing logically and try and figure out for ourselves what the truth really is. So I will be back tomorrow. Not 100% sure what I'm going to do. I tell you, sometimes I just get up in the morning, I log on, and I start looking through what I think is going to be an interesting topic and try to throw a libertarian spin on it. So I will definitely be back tomorrow, going live once again. Looks like I finally got my tech issues figured out, so that's exciting for me. So now I can start hopefully creating even better content for you here using some of the software that I'm upgrading with. And if you're not following me on Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, I'm in all those places, not as prominent as I am on YouTube. I'm not prominent here, but not as often, I should say. But I'm going to try and get more active on those platforms as well. As always, I really appreciate you coming by. Please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, share the content if you like it, if you find it informative. I certainly would appreciate that. That's going to help me the most. And I guess, as always, we're going to see you folks next time.